Thomson Newspaper Limited versus Canada. While individuals, as a rule, have full legal capacity by operation of law alone, artificial persons are creatures of the state and enjoy civil rights and powers only upon the approval of statutory authorities. The individual may stand upon his constitutional rights. He owes no duty to the state, since he receives nothing therefrom, beyond the protection of his life and property. His rights are such as existed by the law of the land long before the organization of the state, and can only be taken from him by due process of law and in accordance with the Constitution. He owes nothing to the public so long as he does not trespass upon their rights. So you and I, we were born into existence. When we came out of our mother, out of the water, a natural birth, we had no designations attached to us or given to us. As soon as we came into this world, we were given a legal personality. The first one that's known to us, that being the designation of child. So we were all considered children, we were all childs, and we were given this legal personality from the state, from man. Now a lot of people want to claim that they're a man or a woman. And they say, I don't want to play an artificial person, I don't want to play a class of person, I only want to stand in my natural state as a man or a woman. And they claim that by taking that stand, that affords them a whole bunch of freedoms. Now, man or woman is a designation in law. Man or woman is a legal personality in law. The difference with declaring yourself to be a man or a woman is that as a man or a woman, you have what is called full legal capacity. That's your fundamental rights and freedoms still intact. You able to exercise your natural rights, your human rights, without being limited or abridged by an enactment. So for those who are saying or are thinking, well, if I claim I'm a man or a woman, that automatically affords me freedom from the legal world and legalese, that's not true. Because just the designation of man or woman is something that was created. It's something that law, something that words created. And it was placed upon us. When we came out, when we were born, again, we were born free. No bondage, no demands made upon us, nothing grabbing at us, telling us what we are. Through law, through legalese, they rendered us a child. They gave us the legal personality of a child. So for example, a child is protected by law, right? They have government agencies that says if you don't treat your child in certain ways, if you don't feed them, clothe them, keep them from the elements, send them to school, take care of them, then the government body will step in and they will take your child away from you, and they will claim that they have the right to take care of your child and take your child away from you because you're not following the obligations that are placed upon you as being a parent. But nevertheless, you've got that designation of child, and with that designation, you have rights and freedoms that are protected from the state. You have the right, for example, to be fed. And if your parents don't feed you, and the state finds out, they will come take you away to feed you. So we're all given designations when we first come into existence, and none of us can claim whatever designation we want to stand on that it's not a legal personality. The only difference is when you claim man or woman, you're claiming your full legal capacity. Or I should say you have your full legal capacity that is recognized by law and that could be exercised if you choose to. Now the opposite to being a man or a woman with full legal capacity is you now play the role or take the designation of something that is known in law and in our society that is called a statutory creature. Now, if you're not familiar with that term, you're wondering what the heck does that mean? Well, first of all, I didn't make up this terminology. It's the Supreme Courts of Canada, when they're dealing with this situation, that brings forth this word. They call us statutory creatures. So, as a man or a woman, you're living at home, wherever it may be. Now you get out and you go into your car. And you start up your car and you go to the store. Does the state party, what does Canada, what does the government consider you when you're in your vehicle? Are you a farmer when you're in your vehicle? Are you a fisherman when you're in your vehicle? What designation does the state party give to you? They claim that you are a driver. That's the terminology, that's the designation that they give to you, driver. Now, that's a statutory creature. That's an artificial person. Now, the law says that an artificial person is created by law. It's not born into existence like you and me, but it's created by law through enactments and regulations. In each and every capacity that we operate within our society, what they've done is they've given us a legal personality as a statutory creature that removes or omits our full legal capacity. It places restrictions on our natural rights, our human rights, our fundamental rights and freedoms. So when you go to school, the statutory creature that they get you to take on or play or operate from is that of student. When you're in the hospital seeking medical attention, the statutory creature, the artificial person, the class of person that you're playing is that of patient. When you're out there on the lake looking for fish in the water with a rod, they label you, they designate you, they gave you the terminology of the class of person of fisherman. Now we can go on and on, because with every action that you take, there is a legal personality that they're giving to you through statutory powers. You go shopping, you're considered a consumer. You buy a home, you're considered a homeowner. What we have to realize here is that, again, they're removing our full legal capacity, our recognition as man or woman, and they're placing us in a recognition of an artificial being, a class of person, a statutory creature. And this is important because, again, the statutory creature, it doesn't have full legal capacity. It can only do or not do what the enactment or regulation allows it to do. So, for example, if you look at police officers all across our country, they are controlled by the Police Service Enactment. So they are considered statutory creatures, and what controls them is the Police Service Enactment. For example, you have a home. If you own a home, you live at home, you receive a tax bill from the municipality. They are using an enactment, a municipal taxation enactment, to classify you as a statutory creature and then control you through this enactment and say you have to pay a taxation at such and such date, your property can only be such and such. But what they're doing is they're controlling your actions through the enactment by making you an artificial person, a class of person, a class of being. Every government agent, every government society, ministers, these are all considered statutory creatures, and none of them are allowed to take arbitrary actions against you. Now, an arbitrary action is to say to do deeds or works or actions against you that are outside of what their enactments allow them to do. All statutory creatures, again, are controlled by enactments. And if you want to keep the government in check, then you need to know what the enactment says.
Artificial person, an entity such as a corporation, created by law and given certain legal rights and duties of a human being. An artificial person is a being, real or imaginary, who for the purpose of legal reasoning is treated more or less as a human being.
When you're at home, you're operating from your full legal capacity, or you should be at least, as a man or a woman, human being. Now again, these are all legal personalities. The only difference is it affords us our full legal capacity, our human rights, our fundamental rights and freedoms, natural rights and freedoms. As a statutory creature, an artificial person, driver for example. So we get out, we leave our home, we're leaving our home as a designation, operating from our full legal capacity as man, walking into the role, assuming the role, playing the role, taking on the designation of driver. Now we're a statutory creature. Now we no longer have our full legal capacity. What transpires here is an enactment, a statutory power, now controls the driver. And in this instance, it would be the Highway Safety Act. So the Highway Safety Act is now what controls the driver. And this is what gives the driver, the statutory creature, its rights and duties. So for example, in the enactment, it will say you cannot go past the speed limit. Now, there's a 50-kilometer speed limit on a road, and you drive by at 75. And there happens to be a police officer around the area, and he sees you, and he pulls you over. And he says, you were doing 75 in a 50 zone. I'm issuing you a ticket. Now, I already explained to you how they issue you a ticket, and that the municipalities use this money to increase the police force and to use this money for the municipality itself. So it's better for them to issue tickets. But nevertheless, they're claiming that as a driver, you had the duty to the Highway Safety Act. Since you broke it, now you're responsible and you're going to be fined. That's the operation of law that they use. So again, you're at home, you leave, you go out, this time you're a woman or man, you go out and you're going to go hunting. Now they're going to call you or designate you, give you the legal class of person of hunter. That's a designation you take on. And that hunter is now controlled by the Firearms Act. So the Firearms Act will tell you how you can and cannot store your guns, how you can transport your guns, what you can do with non-restricted and restricted guns. So the hunter is now controlled by the Firearms Enactment. Now in both cases, under the Highway Safety Act and the Firearms Act, the state party has agents that enforce these enactments against the statutory creatures, the driver and the hunter. And that's the only time they can do it. So for example, if you're out there in the forest and you're hunting, and you're a hunter, he cannot come to you and say, well, the Highway Safety Act says you shouldn't be going over the speed limit. It would make no sense. He's bound to enforce only the statutory power that applies to his position. And in the same way with you, when you're operating from a statutory creature's position, from the position of an artificial person, then your only obligations are to the enactments which apply to that statutory creature at that time. So you leave your home again, and now you're off to work. Now they're designating you a worker. You see how in 1, 2, 3 different capacities that we operated in, they took away our designation of man or woman, and they gave us another designation, a legal personality, a class of person is what they call it, of driver, hunter, and worker. So you're leaving home, you left your full legal capacity, and you picked up rights and freedoms from enactments and regulations. Again, you're at home with your full legal capacity. You don't owe any obligation to the Highway Safety Act. You don't owe any obligation to the Municipal Act, for example. Now you leave your home, and they want you to operate from the class of person who owes the obligation to the enactment. This is limiting and abridging our full legal capacity if this enactment is requiring us to give away our fundamental rights and freedoms. So you leave from home, you take on the role, the designation of worker, and now you're controlled by many, many different acts. You're at home, and you're considered a homeowner when you're at home. Now, if you've seen my other videos, you can go deeper than this. You know that they're rendering us incorporated into their corporate bodies, into their body corporate, and as such, we are officers of the corporation, and therefore, they're controlling us with the municipal acts, the enactments. They're saying, you are a statutory creature,
Even at home, you're an officer, you're a homeowner, and therefore these municipal acts, they apply to you. Our bylaws, our taxation, our rules in this corporate body apply to you. Because if you play the statutory creature, if they force you into that role, under your full legal capacity, no one can force you to be part of that municipality. No one can force you to be incorporated into a body corporate. Again, I use the example. McDonald's, the president of McDonald's, the executive powers of McDonald's cannot knock on my door tonight and say, hello, how are you? Oh, very good, how are you? Oh, I'm good. Tomorrow you're going to show up on my corporation step at 9 o'clock in the morning. You're going to put on an apron and you're going to be the cook for my restaurant tomorrow, located on such and such street. And you have no choice. I said, well, what do you mean? Get the heck out of here. Now, the charter doesn't really apply in that aspect to McDonald's, but I'm just showing you the operation of law. They couldn't force me to be part of their corporate body. So why do the municipalities, and when they're incorporating themselves and they are body corporates, as the justice system said, why do they think that they can use the statutory power to force us into the role to accept the designation as being officer of their corporate body, thereby being under their control, under their administration, under their laws? By doing so, they breach our full legal capacity. We were born free and we're allowed to remain free. Remember Thompson Newspaper Limited. It said our rights existed long before the state. Long before there was a municipal act, we had our fundamental rights and freedoms intact. Long before there was a Firearms Act, we had our fundamental rights and freedoms intact. Long before our Highway Safety Act, we had our fundamental rights and freedoms intact. All these laws, these enacted laws, these rules and regulations that our government created are there to restrict our full legal capacity. Now, as much as I hate to say it, they restrict our full legal capacity. In some ways it's good, and I'm saying in some ways it's good. And I'll let you figure that out on your own why I would say that. But in the majority of the ways, in 75% or more of the time, it's bad, according to my belief. Because you're limiting and abridging our fundamental rights and freedoms, our human rights and freedoms, and the limitation and abridgment that's being placed upon us that you're claiming you're protecting the public good for is not even really non-existent. It was a bunch of guys sitting around a table in suits who probably even never experienced the situation that they're trying to govern, and they drew up rules and regulations and said this is the way men should act in this situation. It's kind of foolish when you look at a lot of these laws. It's like a bunch of executive or suits that sit there, never experience the situation they're trying to govern, and they're trying to draw up laws to control mankind. So operating from the designation or role of statutory creature, it removes our full legal capacity. And they do this to us in every aspect of our lives. In every way that we operate in society, we are removed from the designation of man or woman, and we are placed under the control of an enactment of a statutory power to restrict us and control us. Some would be very happy to understand that this is going on. It's not correct, in my opinion. It shouldn't be allowed, in my opinion. Why? Because it's bondage. It's servitude. And yes, we may need a system to help our society grow and help our society function with one another, food-wise and all life-wise. But when it comes to restricting us and controlling us just for the sake of restricting and controlling us, then those laws need to come down.
Constitution Act of 1867, Article 91. It shall be lawful for the Queen. It shall be dandy. It shall be correct. It shall be okay for the Queen, by and with the advice and consent of the Senate and House of Commons, to make laws for the peace, order, and good government of Canada. Juristic Federal Unit. The Supreme Court of Canada has interpreted the word Canada as follows. Although Section 91 of the Constitution Act gave the Queen the power, with
and the advice and consent of the Senate and the House of Commons to alter the Constitution Act of Canada, except in the certain expressly designated areas. It does not confer power to amend the BNA Act. The word, the designation, the terminology, Canada, in section 91.1, does not refer to Canada as a geographical unit, but refers to the juristic federal unit. The corporate body, the body corporate. So we go back up and we read that again. It shall be lawful for the Queen, bind with the advice and consent of the Senate and House of Commons, to make laws for the peace, order, and good government or control of the corporate body, Canada. You and I, through their enactments and regulations, they try to incorporate us into this corporate body, into the body corporate as officers of their corporation. The Supreme Court of Canada said that the word Canada in the Constitution Act does not refer to a geographical area, does not refer to the landmass, but refers to a juristic federal unit. And a juristic person is an artificial person. And we know that an artificial person, it's an entity such as a corporation that is created by law. So Canada is a corporation. Now, to further verify this fact, we just need to look at the nature of the power of the government, and we will see that indeed it is corporate in nature. So the Constitution Act of 1867, Article 9, the executive government and authority of and over Canada is hereby declared to continue and be vested in the Queen. So executive relates to a corporate body, to a corporation. That's where you find executive powers in operation. Now again, you look at the Constitution Act of 1867, Article 10. It states that the provisions of this act, referring to the Governor General, extend and apply to the Governor General for the time being of Canada. Now remember, when we see that, we're talking about a corporate body, a body corporate, a corporation, or other, the chief executive officer. So both times when they talk about the corporate body Canada, they mention the fact that it's executive powers that are controlling this Canada, which is normal. If it's a corporation, it has to have executive powers. And when you look into Black Law 7th edition, it says Chief Executive Officer, a corporation's highest ranking administrator who manages the firm day by day and reports to the board of directors. So we just saw that the Supreme Court declared that Canada is a corporate body. And when we look to the type of power in operation, we find that it is corporate powers. Canada is a corporation. The Queen has executive power. Executive powers are passed to the Governor General. Executive powers denote or bring forth corporate in nature. In the Crown's statutory instruments, in their enactments and regulations, it is being declared that I and my fellow men and women are being incorporated into the Canadian provincial corporations and therefore are executing a residence within the corporation. Ontario Municipal Act. Municipality means a geographic area whose inhabitants are incorporated. Body corporate. The inhabitants of every municipality are incorporated as a body corporate. So the municipality, wherever it is that you live, is considered under law a body corporate. And you, as an inhabitant, you are incorporated into the body corporate. Now the body corporate is comprised of executive powers, which is an executive council, and you are considered their officer, an officer of the corporation, under the control of the executive powers, forced to obey their rules and regulations, and duty bound to them. Canada is a statutory creature. We saw before that the Supreme Court has ruled that the word Canada represents a federal juristic unit, and a federal juristic unit is an artificial person, a corporate body in law. And we saw that
justice system declares that a body corporate is a corporation in law. So this corporation called Canada, that's a statutory creature, which means it's created by law. It's run by the executive powers of Canada. And I've shown you in the videos who has the executive powers here in Canada. Through the Constitution Act of 1867, it starts with the Queen and transferred into the Governor General, the Lieutenant Governor Generals, the Ministers, and the Queen's Privy Council, and foremost, the Attorney General of Canada. They have the executive powers here in Canada. Now, wherever you live, whether it be Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, whatever municipality, township, village that you're living in, that you've bought a home in, or even that you're just living in, these are considered corporate bodies in law. See, the municipality was created by law, it was given its name, and it's in functioning now. But it's a statutory creature. So when you say the word Toronto, you're actually saying a corporate body or corporation. You might as well be saying McDonald's. You might as well be saying Kentucky Fried Chicken. You might as well be saying Pad Thai Express, whatever it may be, because these are corporate bodies. We think when we say the word Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, we're talking about a geographical area, and yes, when you say it, you're referring to a geographical area, but in law, when they're saying it, they're talking about a corporate body. They're talking about a corporation. Now, each and every one of these municipalities, these cities, these corporate bodies, they're controlled by their own executive powers. So, for example, in Toronto, you have a mayor of Toronto. Montreal, same thing. Vancouver, same thing. Wherever you're living, it's the same thing. There's a city council, and the head of that city council is the mayor. Well, that council and that power, they're statutory creatures, okay? But they are the executive powers over the corporate body. Just like we have the executive powers over Canada, well, your local municipality are the executive powers over the corporate bodies. Now, you and me, wherever we live in our country, Canada, we are being incorporated into these corporate bodies through enactments and regulations. So they have the Municipal Act, and I shared with this before, but they have the Municipal Act, and through the Municipal Act they bring forth an operation of law that says the inhabitants of the municipal area are incorporated into the body corporates. So you're becoming part of the body corporate. Therefore, you are considered an officer of the body corporate. And as an officer of the body corporate, the executive powers now have the right to control you and tell you must follow the bylaws and the rules of the corporation. So I get hired, or I go to work for an investment firm. The guy sits me down, he tells me, these are the rules, what you can and cannot do. And I fail to obey those rules. After a number of warnings, he's going to say, you're fired, you're not working here anymore. Why? Because I didn't obey the rules. Well, these guys can't fire you. These executive powers, they can't fire you and say, get out of our municipality. But what they do is they fine you. And they threaten you. And they use bylaws and the rules against you to say that you have to submit to us, and we can control your home, and we can control your life, and we can control your actions. Why? Because enactments and regulations are meant to restrict. That's what they want to do. That's why they created them, to restrict our actions, to remove our full legal capacity. So they're making us a statutory creature by incorporating us into their corporate bodies, claiming that we are officers of this corporate body, and now the enactments apply against us. We're no longer men and women with full legal capacity, but we're a statutory creature created by law, owing obligations to the executive powers. And if we fail to give those obligations or abide by those obligations, the enforcers come and say, you better do it or you're going to be penalized. It's the same garbage that's been going on for centuries and centuries and centuries, just hidden differently nowadays. It's a ruling elite, a ruling class that are using words on paper, laws on paper, and then guns and force to have their way and to control us, to take away our freedom as men and women, to take away our liberty, and to put us into servitude, to put us into bondage to a system.
The Financial Administration Act. Charges for rights and privileges. The Governor in Council may, on the recommendation of the Treasury Board, by regulation prescribe the fees or charges to be paid for a right or privilege conferred by or on behalf of Her Majesty in right of Canada, by means of a license, permit, or other authorization, by the persons or classes of persons on whom the right or privilege is conferred. Let's look at that slowly. They can prescribe the fees or charges to be paid for a right or privilege that is to be conferred by or on behalf of Her Majesty in right of Canada. So we can have to pay a charge in order to exercise a right or privilege that is given to us by or on behalf of Her Majesty, and this right operates within Canada, the body corporate. Now, we have to obtain this right through a means of license or permit or some other form of authorization. Now notice who's obtaining this. By the persons or classes of persons on whom the right or privilege is conferred. You want to drive? Okay, great. Pay the fees or charges to obtain the right or privilege Her Majesty will grant you, and you're allowed to drive now in Canada. You will obtain a license and permit, and the class of person that you will be driver. You want to fish? Great. Okay. Pay some fees or charges to obtain this right that Her Majesty will confer upon you, which operates in the body corporate of Canada. You will obtain a license or permit or other authorization, and now the class of person who you will be, because the right is conferred upon you, is fisherman. You want to hunt? Great. Pay the fees or charges, and you will have that right or that privilege conferred upon you by Her Majesty in right or on behalf of the body corporate Canada, the corporate body Canada. Now remember, she's the executive power we saw in the Constitution Act. So the executive power is granting you a right that you can operate in the body corporate if you pay for it. They'll give you the license, the permit, and then the class of person that you will be hunter. This is the operation of law that they're doing each and every time that we have to pay a fee or pay a charge in order to exercise a right or freedom. They are designating us that class of person, conferring upon us authorization on behalf of the executive power, Her Majesty, that we can operate these rights within the body corporate called or designated Canada. Why? Because we are officers. We are statutory creatures. We are controlled by the enactments.
We're born into existence as men and women with our full legal capacity. We have natural rights, fundamental rights and freedoms, human rights and freedoms that we can exercise. Statutory creatures, artificial persons, are created by law. They are controlled by enactments, controlled by statutory powers, statutory creatures. Driver, student, mayor, police, homeowner, officer. All these that I mentioned are classes of persons. And each class of person has certain rights and duties that it must operate and perform. Depending on what capacity you are operating from, will depend what enactment is controlling you. That will show you
what obligation or duty you have. In their world, that's the way they set it up. But you and I have a set of fundamental rights and freedoms, a set of natural rights, human rights, that says, why should I step in and play the role of class of person, for example, officer of a corporate body, and give up my full legal capacity to accept duties and obligations that your enactments are placing upon me. You see, the point to all this in the beginning was that the enactments and regulations would liberate you, would bless you, would help your life, would be there for the good. Over time, they realized they could use enactments and statutory powers to restrict and control you, to govern you, and force you to obey their will and their desires. And that's what it's been. For those who are young enough to remember this, when they brought out the social insurance number back in the day, what percentage were they claiming they needed from your income in order to have this great system? Here we are in 2016. What percentage are they taking away from the individuals now? Let's add a zero here and a zero here, and that makes more sense. And they used enactments and regulations to get this accomplished. And that's why I say that many times, the majority of times, these statutory powers are limiting and abridging our fundamental rights and freedoms, and they are being used in a bad way to strip us and to remove from us our freedom, place us in servitude and bondage, and say you have nothing to say about it. I'm thankful whether or not you can enforce your rights or have been able to enforce your rights. I'm still thankful that we have the international covenants and that we have the charter. For when you understand it and you use it to take a stand against the state party and the executive powers and the legislators and their enactments for all the limiting and abridging that they're doing to your charter rights, you understand that that mechanism that's there for us, that's in operation for us, is a good thing. Because like R. versus Haynes said in that judgment, prior to the charter's existence, an individual like you and I, we didn't have much power. We didn't have much ability to complain to the state, hey, you're taking away my fundamental rights and freedoms. You're forcing me to play a class of person, enter into a designation that's stripping me and limiting and abridging my natural rights, my fundamental rights and freedoms that are protected and recognized by law. Prior to the charter, the advent of the charter, the Supreme Court said that we were expected to surrender our full legal capacity over to the statutory creature. They created the enactment, they limited and abridged our fundamental right and freedom, our natural rights. Too bad for you. Too bad. It's for the public good, you must accept it, you have nothing to say. What does that sound like? Who did that? World War II? I always say, International Covenants, Universal Declaration of Human Rights came out after World War II, and they write it within their documentations. Why? Because they never wanted what happened with Hitler's government and the power that it seized over the people to ever transpire again. So they set forth or brought forth these laws, these rights, and said, we believe that this would protect individual mankind from a tyranny, from a government tyranny. Prior to the charter, we were expected to submit to public law. But since the advent of the charter, our individual fundamental rights and freedoms now trump public law. If forcing us to play the class of person, be controlled by the enactment, removes our full legal capacity as afforded to us through the charter,
then it's of no force or effect against us, and we don't have to obey it. And pretty much the Charter covers everything. Because what you don't find in Section 7, if they ever try to place a limitation on Section 7 through Section 1, which the Supreme Court has already said they're not going to do it, but if they would ever try it, Article 26 jumps in. Article 26 says the mention in the Charter of certain rights and freedoms doesn't mean that Canada doesn't acknowledge that there are other rights and freedoms in existence. Well, where would you find them? Well, where would you find them?